Camera angle for you.
Brilliant, thank you very much.
They're not on pink, I'm afraid, so I will take them straight away and shred them.
Yeah. Just put my thingy on silent. Did you just turn off my alarm?
Yes.
Great, thank you. No, that's good.
Are we ready? We ready? Yeah. Thank you all for joining us tonight. This is the meeting of Frome Town Council. I'm Andy Rintmore and I'll be chairing this evening's meeting. Just to remind everyone, we've got people online and here in the room. For those in the room, a little housekeeping. The emergency exit is in the rear corner of the room and the assembly point is at the far side of the car park. Toilets are at the end of the corridor on the right, and there is an accessible toilet to the right of the lift. Help yourselves to a cup of tea and biscuits. It's edited here to add and biscuits, because we can't forget those. Tonight, Paul will clerk, Laura will manage the slides and take the minutes. Sarah and Rachel will manage the questions board, participant settings and IT generally. Becky will be tweeting. The meeting will be recorded and we are live streaming to our YouTube channel. For those councillors attending via Zoom, please use the yellow hand. For everyone else, ask questions through the Q&A board. I'd just like to take a minute's silence as a mark of support and empathy for the people of Ukraine who are suffering at the moment, and also to residents of our twin town, Rabka in Poland, who are doing so much to help the refugees who are going over the border and looking after them. So we'll just take a minute. Okay, thank you for that. Agenda item 1 is apologies for absence, declaration of councillors' interests and approval of the minutes from the last meeting, which was on the 19th of January 2022.
So we have apologies from Maxine Crawley.
Anyone else?
No, just need to
Propose that. Can I find a proposer to accept the apologies? John Nelson, seconder, Anita Collier. Thank you very much.
So Anita second that, John.
Sorry, I should have projected that a little louder. Anita seconding.
That's unanimous.
Okay. Agenda item 2 is...
So any declarations of interest?
sorry, any declarations of interest for tonight?
And the minutes. Oh, I'm sorry, Anne, I didn't
Sorry,
see you.
Yes, mine's my technical apologies because I'm having to attend via Zoom.
Thank you. And I think that also goes for the other councillors attending by Zoom. So thanks, Anne, for reminding me on that one.
Lovely job. And we are going to...
Minutes.
Yeah, approve the minutes from the last meeting. Yes.
I wasn't actually on as present at the last meeting, I was actually there.
My apologies, I'll make those amendments.
No, I'm not that important, but you know.
For the record.
So, Ali was here.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just, there's a couple of points in the minutes I just like before they're approved.
Yeah.
Jill, at the last, Jill phone. At the last meeting, you asked about yellow lines.
Yes.
Around Foundry Barton and Henley Way.
Correct. Yeah.
Jane has re-emphasise those with the Highways Department because we submitted that request along with a lot of others, I think a few years ago now, where as part of their parking review, there are a lot of I remember you, Rich and Mark, going around.
Quite a few of us went.
Absolute, yeah, and those were sure to be part of that. But Jane has re-emphasised that point. Yeah. But we haven't got a reply back from them. But what I'll do, I'll ensure that you do receive a reply via Jane when we get one back.
Can I bring it up tonight? Again, can I be a...
Jill, can I ask you to speak through the microphone so that people online can hear you too? Thanks.
Can I bring this up again tonight, please, as a result of the Sunday market?
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Is that all right? Okay. You know, at the appropriate time. Yeah.
Chris has also reported about the leaves that are wet and slippery on Blind House Lane. I don't know if that's been improved at all as a report of as a result of Chris reporting.
I haven't been there this week, but
Okay.
yeah.
That was all.
Okay. Cool.
So you need something to propose and second those
So
minutes.
do we have a proposer for the minutes? Andy Palmer, seconded by Mark Dorrington.
That's unanimous.
Thanking you. So agenda item 3 is whether to adopt the report from Frome Town Council's unitary consultants on a strategy for asset devolution and an update on the Frome area local.
Sorry, Andy, we missed out the questions in item 2.
Oh dear,
Yeah, no.
sorry. Any questions or comments? Jill?
Is it the public's turn now, is it? Right. Okay. Well, yeah, I know. I should know how to speak to this blinking thing after talking newspaper years. As a result from Sunday, the Sunday market, I am not criticising or knocking the Sunday market. It does Frome a lot of good. It's the drivers with their cars. You couldn't hardly get a Mini through Foundry, Barton and Henley Way on Sunday, let alone an emergency vehicle. That has got to stop. And also, apart from the Sunday market parking problems, it is increasing with general weekday parking. And we are going to keep on that. It is 20 years since that site was completed. We have been bothered with parking for a long, long time, as you all know, and with me keep coming and boring the pants off you every time you have a meeting. But we're going to carry on, we're going to persevere, that we're going to get yellow lines on the junctions and the corners, at least. And also whether the traffic could be persuaded to use the park and ride. The facilities are there at each end of town. Otherwise, I don't know quite, how strong we can be about that. I know Welsh Mill Lane, they do have the road cones, but I don't think that can be applied in our site because you're going to stop residents parking their cars outside their properties, but they are having difficulty now. I know every house has got a garage and a parking space, but it is Sunday really brought it to a head again. Can I go on?
Is it the same subject?
No.
So let me answer that one.
Right.
I think everyone in Frome feels your pain.
Yes.
And particularly in the Foundry Barton area. I wonder whether it might be popular to ask Steve Deacon, the Somerset County Council parking manager, to come along to either the next council or town matters meeting, just to sort of answer directly where's the blockage, and he can give us all an update. Would that be a general nods around the room?
Mark Dorrington's been round. He knows what the complications are with parking.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I'll invite Steve Deacon to either the next council or the next town matters meeting.
Right. Thank you very much.
So he can at
Can I
least.
carry on?
Yes, you can, Jill.
Thank you. I did report about the railings on the Mendip side of the river between the two bridges. And Chris Stringer did email me to say that they would be repaired this last week, and bingo, they have. Wonderful.
Thanks, Jill. That's really good to hear.
The area below the large flight of stairs, Chris Stringer is not available tonight, I suppose, no. But there's an area belonging to, that's based in Glasgow, and I think it's either Greenacres or Green something or other, anyway. And it is an absolute mess. When you look on their website, they say that they maintain lots of little pockets of land all over the country and in new development sites, such as we have got on the Singer site. And they supposed to enhance the site. Well, someone can come round. Mark, you've seen it. And it is a disgrace, an absolute disgrace. And the brambles are starting to grow again. They're a hazard up the steps. And anyway, I would like, Chris Stringer did also, he did contact them and he got a contractor in to deal with and tidy up that area last year, but it has all grown amok again and it's an absolute mess. Right, end of story. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jill. I'll talk to Chris about this and see if we can get something done.
And for the record, you never bore the pants off us. It's fine. Have we got any more questions or comments? Have we got anything online?
No, we're fine. Sarah, just to say, did you see Claire's comment?
So what's Claire saying?
She's saying that she's not, that our sound is quite quiet from Zoom.
Okay. So
The other online...
Let's all talk up. Make sure we're talking into the microphones.
Can I have a thumbs up from the councillors online as they can hear okay? Becky, Lizzie? Thanks.
Yep. Okay. So hopefully that problem's sorted.
Okay. All right. So, apologies for skipping over that one just then. Now we're on number 3, which is whether to adopt the report from Frome Town Council's unitary consultants on a strategy for asset devolution and an update on the Frome area local community network, and that is with Martin, Ian and Kate. I will pass it over to you guys.
So I think Martin and Ian are going to do the first bit and then Kate's going to do the second.
Excellent.
I'll kick off then. Good evening, councillors, and thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come back and talk to you through the report that we've been creating with you over the last 6 to 9 months. Paul's got some slides which we'll put up in a second. I'll just apologise for myself just in case I keep coughing a little bit because I'm sort of 10 days after I had the dreaded COVID, but thankfully there's plenty of social distance between me and you, and I've registered negative, so it should be all fine. But in case I start coughing, I said apology. I'm going to do the first bit of the presentation, and Ian will seamlessly get on to the last bit and the period at the end for questions. But if Paul, if you could help us by putting the presentation up, we'll work through the report that way. It might be easier.
It's on its way. I can see the green bar moving towards the right. We're nearly there.
Okay, well, as it does, I'll just sort of introduce and say that we all know that local government is going to make a major change in the next couple of years in Somerset, and that's going to give Frome Town Council a lot of opportunities, particularly in the field of assets, but also services we hope later on, to get those assets more locally controlled and be more receptive and responsive to local needs and to provide opportunities that haven't been provided in the past. So we're going to talk you through that what we've been doing with you to help prepare you so strategically and with some detail as well for the months that are to come. And we hope that our kind of report and work we've done so far does that, takes you a long way down that road. So kind of if it's nearly ready, we can start. Is it downloaded yet, Paul? Or
it's really nearly ready.
Okay, all right, fine. Okay. Well, I'll keep on then, just to save on time later on, and we can flip through the first couple of slides as we go. I mean, what we've tried to do in our report is give you a high-level overview of the opportunities and the threats and issues of owning assets. We've made some general recommendations and principles. So here we go. So we can probably, oh, it's looking very different. Okay. That's where we are. That's lovely. Thank you very much. So we're going to, we've made some general recommendations and principles, and we've made some specific, as far as specific as we can be at this point, recommendations on some of the areas, sites, buildings, and projects that you have a particular interest in. Okay, if you'd like to pop over. I'll just sort of kick off to give a flavour really and background from a couple of quotes from the One Somerset business case, which is where parishes and town councils have the capability, and we believe that you do have. There is a great advantage in delegating the management of assets. The example is given car parks, or services, and the example is given local economic development to parishes. And the second one is that parish and town councils should be involved in determining the methodology behind the devolution. And that's important because it sort of tees up the principle of application of the principle of devolution by request. And if you take that at face value, then that gives you the opportunity to make that request for the devolution of a particular asset where it's going to benefit the residents of Frome. With that comes a whole series of work, but I mean, it's a very important principle and one that we will come back to later on. Thank you, Paul. We can move on to the next slide. There isn't. Oh, sorry. This is going to be a little. If you go back one, sorry, Paul. There's a bit of a delay. Okay, so although the process that we have been promised from the transition team hasn't been published yet, it's a result of a pilot that's being underway at the moment. We haven't got a process that's there. The business case does give us some clues to some of the main elements of it, and one will be cost neutrality to the unitary council in particular, because that's what they'll be looking at. But also it mentions the town or the recipient body to make sure there's no financial instability. So that is an important point in it. And the second point was assets with income. And we can think about car parks, leisure centres and so on, will have to be balanced with the service responsibilities, which you could take as being maintenance, management, enforcement and so on. Okay, thank you. So why take on assets or services at the local level? Well, there are a whole series of reasons why you should, and I think without sort of teaching you to suck eggs, certainly financial viability is to threaten services is a big one. We've seen it in libraries, we've seen it sometimes with leisure facilities, and we're likely to see more of that as we go forward with the savings target that the unitary has to make. But with local control, then you can look at different sources of finance, from your precept through to grants, through to crowdfunding, and through to more imaginative things that I haven't got time to talk about now that are developed in many areas. So you can look at different types of finance, accountability and access for local decision making to really make sure things are managed in a way that suits the locality in terms of opening hours, in terms of facilities allowed, people allowed into the facility, in terms of future uses of buildings are all important. The very important section, an asset, a place, a building, a place can unleash local creativity and custodianship. We've seen that with open spaces, we've seen that with people looking after them, we've seen that with biodiversity and the opportunity to be being used in different ways. So there's lots of local improvements that can be made to suit local needs. And with that goes a sense of community and pride very often, which is really important to the place. And I think that's something that you found in Frome and worked on and developed, you should look at it with pride because you've done a marvellous job on that. And I think there's more of that can be done. And with that, it can go with a building, an asset can go, and with that local management can go and increase confidence and the development of skills and aspirations. And I did notice on your agenda before, the whole loop to loop, and the way that that has evolved as a service, which never was there before, which has clearly raised money locally and has created an opportunity to serve a local need. So I think that was a really excellent example that you're already dealing with right now. Thank you, Paul. So the method that we work with, and we have worked with you on this, is really we've had three major workshops at the beginning just to see where your appetite was, see what the ambition was around the devolution of assets. We've done a lot of intelligence gathering from all the published sources we can find, which include strategies, plans, budgets where they're available for the facilities. But there's a big proviso on that, because we haven't been able to get on many of the assets and facilities the detailed budgets that lay behind the published figures. Partly that's because the asset teams in Mendip District Council and in Somerset Council are very much tied up at the moment with their own arrangements around transition, and they are not actually giving us the information we need at this point in time. It will be necessary and it will be forthcoming. So some of the detail that we'd have wanted to get down to, we've not been able to do in the absence of that information, which will be necessary for transparency for you and for them to move forward. We've looked at best practice around the country as well, and we've pulled in some areas where devolution has been very successful in Cornwall, to a degree in Wiltshire as well. We've looked at Milton Keynes, and we've looked through the Local Government Association locality group, which has got some excellent examples around the country where at local level parishes, town councils have taken on facilities, and so have community organisations with great success. In December, we had a confirmation workshop just to check the direction we're going, and we got some really useful information from that. And this is our sort of conclusion report at this point in time. So it's a phase 1 report. Thank you. The question that we kind of asked all the way through, working through with you in the workshops we've had, is going back to that question, how does this particular asset matter to Frome residents? Because it's easy to be a bit of a kleptomaniac and say, yeah, we would like that, we want that, and we would like that as well. But I think what you'll find is, because there is a process involved and there's a lot of work involved in all of these, it's really important to be clear why you want it and what the end game is in terms of the better facility, the better service, the better outcome. And to there, we're looking to the clues to come from your strategies that you've got, your Frome plan, your existing open space strategy, community strategy, which you'll be needing to look at as you go into the new council to update. But it's really important to have that rationale behind, because it will come through later on as to why you're trying to own that, because, well, as I say, there's work and there's money involved with any of them. And asking yourself what difference you can make. And the final point is really quite important. It is looking at alternatives to owning, because owning is always a desirable outcome. It's nice to have, but sometimes it can be very complex. And sometimes if you look at leisure facilities, you look at areas where there's contracts involved, then you could potentially achieve the same outcomes through different means. And those will include, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute, but we have talked them through in some of the workshops, include exercising influence on the way contracts are let, on the way that they're managed, and the outcomes in those. And with the other promises in the One Somerset business case for greater involvement, greater transparency, and using town councils as trusted partners, there should be much more opportunity to influence the way that those places, spaces are managed. And that's something that you must take advantage of, because sometimes it will be more fruitful to go down that route, certainly in the early days, perhaps, yes, because these things will take time. Thank you. Thank you. So the asset classes that we sort of worked with on you, really, open space, and there are various ones of those. We'll talk about those in detail in a minute. Community and leisure facilities, leisure and cultural facilities were a big one for you as well. Educational establishments, they are certainly on the radar, but they're certainly ones that are likely to remain strategic responsibilities of the Somerset Council. And nevertheless, there are opportunities in certainly the management of those educational facilities and dual use, but also their grounds and where land has been set aside in Section 106 agreements for future educational provision, then that has been identified as areas where the questions need to be asked about what their current use is, how long they would be in that particular state, and what they could be used for in the meantime. And that's an opportunity of influence. But in terms of managing the educational sites, it's very unlikely that they would be ones that the strategic authority want to devolve. And we also looked at commercial industrial spaces, which included the recycling centre. Thank you. If I could just talk briefly about those alternatives to the freehold, although we are talking about asset transfer, it is worthwhile, because if I look through some of the ways in which local councils, towns have been able to make a huge difference to the way things are managed and assets are managed locally, these other alternatives are ones that we always would want to ask the question on. Not always before, but sometimes before you go to a full asset transfer. Long-term leases, with or without capital revenue funding, are sometimes an alternative to ownership. They're not always the best way, but sometimes they are an option if the owner will not transfer. Transferring to a voluntary sector organisation, although we've talked all the way through this about Frome Town Council, you've got a really active community network and community interest organisations. And sometimes it would be appropriate to consider the transfer of those assets and facilitate that going straight to one of those organisations who could be a more appropriate pair of hands to run them locally and give them the opportunity for a base or to expand their services and facilities. So I think when we talk all the way through about devolution, we're always trying to keep in your mind the fact that the devolution does not need actually to be to the town council. It can be to another organisation where that is a better end game. Community use agreements are other ways. We talked about educational establishments. Community use agreements can be influenced. The way in which the length of time of hall is available, the type of uses that can be in it, the use of playing fields, etc., are all things that can be discussed, can be fraught with problems, but can definitely, that's the sort of thing that you may wish to influence through your power of influence. The long-term lease contract and service specification with a specialist service delivery partner, that's what can happen with leisure facilities, for instance, where the actual site will remain in the ownership of the original owner, but the management of the lease with third sector or third party, for instance, a leisure provider, can be managed through the town council as opposed to what was, the district council at that time. And that does happen with some success in different places. It's something to be gone into in quite some detail, but it can actually be, a way of managing leisure facilities in particular further down the line. The green tick box there with agency agreements, an agency agreement is usually where you are acting on behalf of somebody that won't let go of the asset, and that might be for good reason. For instance, the Highways Authority may not wish to let go of some of the assets around the highways, but they might want you to manage those for them, and particularly the open space, the green spaces, and maybe the grass cutting and so on. In those cases, you would be an agency, and that agency will come with it. There will be a series of, there will be a service level agreement, and you would have to meet the criteria of the organisation that you were the agency of. So it's a little bit different to local control, but it's where you're actually running on behalf of another organisation, a service locally. And it might make sense when you're looking at things like bringing together open spaces of different types in an area, just to give you the critical mass in terms of staffing and equipment and so on, to be able to manage open spaces. The orange square there is joint or enhanced service delivery. And that's where you can look at what's being provided already, and for instance, the library services, and you can say, we'd like it done differently. We'd like it done at a higher level, to a higher specification, with greater range of access, greater range of times and openings, etc. And we're prepared to work with you to make that happen. We need us to put in the door, and we will put in some resource, we'll put in something in return for something else. And therefore, you're not changing the actual way it's ownership of this facility, but you are influencing the way it's managed, and that can be quite successful. And the last one really is influence, which we talk about a lot, and it's something that I think you'll be wanting to develop more as you get muscle and get strength and get capacity as you go through, as the strategic authority becomes more strategic, and you begin to be able to step up into the spaces which are left. Then the influence that you had as a trusted local partner, as contracts are negotiated and as the buildings are discussed, is quite important, and your influence on the way things happen in Frome hopefully will grow, and that's certainly what they're saying in the business case. So let's hold on to that one. Thank you. Please pass on. So just in summary, all sorts of roles that you can adopt in terms of assets. Bottom left is really the deliverer. That's it, running and doing the assets and managing yourselves, which you can do. The other one above that is enabling that local talent. Where I've said about community interest groups and community societies and sports clubs and all those things, it's helping them be the ones that actually run those facilities and potentially devolve to those facilities. And the other one is the lever, that influence one on the right, where you are looking to expand your role in the way in which things happen locally, contracts happen, and so on. Okay, so I think we could pass on. Yeah, and that's kind of, we're going to move on now. That sort of sets the scene, I think, to some of the work that we've done. And Ian's going to take you through now some of our general and specific recommendations. So if I could pass on to Ian. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Good evening, everybody. If I could get the next slide, please. So we've split this section up into what you were clear about and what you were less clear about, so something that needs a bit more thought. So just in terms of what you were clear about, you had absolute clarity in the discussions about the potential of the cultural quarter, and you've got some clear plans there around the town centre already, and how these kind of areas will work to underpin the regeneration of the town. You're also really clear, and Martin's already kind of mentioned it, about the working you've already got with arts, cultural, and other cultural organisations, and actually a range of organisations across the town. So you've got a clarity around how the synergies can work with those organisations to take things forward. The third area that you're really clear about, some really interesting discussions about the benefits of managing certain buildings, and the good examples, the library. It's currently the library, but what else could it do? How else could it work for the community? So you've got some thinking around that, and how you could use assets, building spaces in a different way, and sort of make them work well for the community, or in different ways for the community. And then the fourth item that you were really clear about is the value of open spaces. Again, a debate here, really clear debate in all of the workshops, where you're already using open spaces to meet a range of different strategy kind of objectives, health and well-being, and so on. And you can see, and you've got a clarity about how you could add to that with, for example, the cemetery land and other green spaces to help with biodiversity and other strategies. So those are the four which are really clear. There's a number which are requiring a little bit more thought, perhaps. The first is on ownership. So whilst there's a number of areas of land that you feel would do well and should be owned by Frome Town Council, there's more clarity required, I think, probably on the outcomes of that ownership. So a good example is Pack Saddle. You feel like that needs to be in the ownership of the community, and rightly so, but not entirely clear how that might be developed. And actually, obviously, there are some plans moving forward, I think, now on that particular piece of land. So a useful example. So yeah, it's that clarity about what would you do with that piece of land, the recycling centre, etc., when you have it. So next slide, please. So there's this issue around analysing costs, understanding the costs, income, how a particular asset would work over time. And so, for example, car parks, which we're going to talk a bit about later on, income has been bumpy, to say the least, during the COVID period, and is following a downward trend. So what does that mean if you acquired that particular asset as an income source, and then that income reduced? How would you deal with that? Martin's already mentioned this as well. You've got this idea about sort of devolution, but as was mentioned, it could equally be to a community interest company or other community organisations. So there's some more work and thinking to do on that. So how would that work? And then there's the issue of where assets are due for refurbishment. Who would undertake that work? Would that be in advance of a transfer, after a transfer? And if it was after a transfer, how would that be funded? So it's important in doing that as well to clarify what the condition of the assets are. And we talk about that later in the report. So it's carefully assessing the risks. And then there's some thoughts about negotiating a revenue payment for taking on facilities, which has happened in other parts of the country, Cornwall, etc., Wiltshire, where people have taken on a dowry to make things work. And then further work sort of required on more clarity on what the organising impacts of taking on these services are. How many staff do you need? If you were to take on a service, what are the 2P implications of that? So some quite detailed and far-reaching implications that need to be thoroughly explored. And then I think we're saying to you that there's a need for additional capacity and capability. Obviously, if you were to acquire these assets, it's quite a big program of potential acquisitions, and it does need staffing and also that sort of ability to understand specialist skills to understand what might happen and how those assets might impact you in terms of overall management. Can I get the next slide, please? Okay, so there's a number of short-term priorities identified. I'm not going to read them all out. There's 9 of them there, but they do relate to the kind of areas that we've already outlined in the report. So broadly speaking, so I won't read them out, but broadly speaking, they're in the kind of cultural quarter. There's a number there. There's a priority around how do you deal with open spaces? And Martin's already mentioned a number of different mechanisms for potentially influencing those without actually owning them. So kind of how does that work? And then we've got this kind of desire around the community halls and green space at Vallis Road, Key Centre, Edmund Park, which is currently an allocated school site, and then the cemetery and extension land at East Hill, which has got a long history. So those are the short-term priorities that were identified through the work. Next slide, please. And then there was these 3 in the medium and long-term priority area. We've got lands and buildings up at the county depot, the recycling centre, and then the long and short stay town car parks. So their management and income. So those are the kind of sets of priorities that were identified through the work. Can I get the next slide, please? So I'm just going to run you through some more detail on some of the areas that were worked up, and then just talk in a bit more detail about some of these areas. So the first one was the cultural quarter. We've already mentioned that we had a real clarity around this. On your left there's a list of assets that sort of make up that cultural quarter, and I'm sure you all know where it is. So there's a range of different components there which would make up that area. So you've started that piece of work, and so we're obviously recommending, and you're already doing this, building up local support and forming up a business case. So you kind of need to understand more about the assets, what potential sources of finance are there. So how could you acquire these assets and make them work? So the potential for applications to the Levelling Up Fund, for example, and other funding sources which are appearing at the moment from government, from your own resources. There's also obviously this is a big area of the town, and there's a number of different assets, as already mentioned. So we're recommending a staged approach in terms of looking at these particular assets and sort of figuring out which ones you might want to own first and which ones would work best for you. and for the cultural quarter itself. One of the things that was very clear in the debate is around the cheese and grain, sort of the underused area adjacent to the cheese and grain along the riverbank. So there's a thought investigating how that might work. And then particularly in this area, obviously there's a big area of car parking there. So as previously mentioned, there's a need there to kind of review that car park income to figure out how that might work to support this particular area, and to look at trends and how those overall events and activities are actually impacting that particular area. And then finally in this area, so it's probably working through the more difficult assets perhaps here are the bridges. And so you would need to identify and have condition and cost surveys, either by yourself or working with the owners of the assets, the county council in this instance, to ensure that you had absolute clarity on what you were taking on in that particular situation. Okay. Yep. So the next area is the Arts and Leisure Centre. So a little tricky, perhaps. So a number of different components here as well. So there's a number of things that need to be done to kind of review this area. The first is seeking this detail from Fusion and Mendip about what the actual arrangements are on the lease, and both for the Merlin Theatre there and for the Leisure Centre. We'd need to work to understand what the leisure outcomes and participation rates are there, and this goes back to understanding what you're trying to do with the asset as well. So how are you going to try and make this place work better for the community? One of the things here perhaps is that it may be better for you to seek this more influential and active role in monitoring the leases at the moment, to get a clearer understanding of what's happening there, so that you can plan for the future. And that might be either in your ownership if it had already transferred, or with the college, or with the Leisure Trust Fusion there, try and understand more effectively what's happening so that you can then formulate a plan for going forwards in this particular area. So the next point really, so merging into that next point, is around this bigger plan. So what's going to happen here, and how would this work better for the community in terms of sports and arts and so on. And then I guess the last point here really is around considering what this facility might do in terms of these kind of longer term investments. How would this work with the cultural quarter? What's this part of the town going to do, and how is it going to work harder for Frome with your arts and cultural facilities? So next slide, please. So this third area then, the detailed area, is around community facilities, and this discussion was focused on the Vallis Road and the Quay Centre, and so it's namely really around the acquisition of these two key assets, and so you were thinking about how this could work. So there's a number of points here which you would need to sort of follow through, which you're already doing, which is engaging with the existing managers, the YMCA that operate there, and really getting to grips with and agreeing this kind of shared vision and getting a strategy together for this site. And again, really how future uses there might a better outcome for the community. So what could you do with the space around the buildings? How could that all work together? You would need to understand more about the building running costs, as mentioned in the third point here, in order to kind of make some decisions around this particular area. And then some of the more detailed information around the condition of the buildings, and therefore what investment is required. And then the last point really then is to, in this particular area, is to look at the costs, the capital costs, the revenue implications of running these buildings, and what sort of funding sources might be available to you in the management of this particular asset, and they're listed there on the bottom of the slide. Next slide, please. So then open spaces, and obviously they're listed on the left-hand side, and there's a range of these different spaces of different sizes across Frome and the area. And so what we are suggesting here, recommending, is that you investigate what the existing maintenance contract is like, and you kind of establish that with Mendip and Somerset County Council. So sort of understanding what the opportunities are to make these areas work in a way that fit the Frome strategies, and what the planned budgets are. What could happen on these sites to make that contribution to Frome in a wider sense. In terms of the discussion that was had around these spaces, there was some discussion around the local community network, the wider parishes around Frome, and how could all of this land work harder and fit strategies. So there's something to explore there. And you have also, as a priority, you have this idea around cemetery and the cemetery extension. So the exploration of that piece of land and how that could be used, perhaps in a slightly for burials, but in a slightly different way, managed for wildlife and allow public access and so on. So as a green space, but also in that more traditional sense as a cemetery. And then in this open spaces theme, we've got Edmonton Park as well. So that's a particular area that was identified earlier on. And then also looking at which additional spaces, as I said, there's a number of them peppered all across the town. So it's really kind of exploring that in much more detail and understanding a bit about how those might work. Can I have the next slide, please? Should have brought some water into my office, I think. So one of these sort of longer term aims was we started to take a look at the recycling depot and the business units up there on the industrial estate, and sort of thinking about what the future management plans were there for the new unitary authority and for the tenants, and how could these spaces be used in a slightly different way. So we think you need to determine the planning status of the site and what the opportunities are to develop it there. There's a range of things we discussed, I think, with Paul and some of your other colleagues during our visits there. But one of the things you would need to do for sure in this particular area is engage specialists, so cost consultants or so on, quantity surveyors, really to understand the condition of the existing site and have a clear building condition survey. So that might need to be done by the county council in advance or in conjunction together. So that's a debate to be had as we go forwards. And then in this particular one as well, it's exploring not just ownership, but as we've said here, kind of different options, partial tenancies, licenses to occupy either a part or the whole of the site, and sort of what is more desirable in terms of your aspirations for this particular site. And then finally, in terms of the priority areas, go to car parks. And so this was discussed, I think, fully in one of the workshops, but so there's four points here really, is understanding the management costs. And obviously there's a range of costs that are incurred in managing a car park, which are listed on the screen. As I've already said, there is a trend in car parking income which is downwards. So there's something to think about in terms of acquiring these particular sites. In other areas which have gone unitary, there's been and deals have been done around assets and so on. The car parks have been put forward as an income source. So are they a possible basis for that? And then how would you deal with the enforcement role if you were to acquire these car parks? Because it is something you need to think about in terms of income generation and actually making sure they work hard. So there's a range of issues there to work for. Next slide, please. So what do we think you ought to do next? In terms of a process, we think you do need to set up this asset devolution working group, which would follow on from the town council elections, which are coming up very soon. So it's really to explore your key strategies, understand what the community want, review all of the available data, and then to have a really clear strategy and approach and agree what you're going to do next. So, you know, that piece of work we believe is what you need to, is where you need to go next. So you've got absolute clarity, and obviously that group would consist of key officers and key members. And I think that's it from me, unless Martin, you want to add anything else to that?
No, that's fine. I think we'll leave it there, Ian, and pass it over to members.
And we're done long enough.
I think so.
Excellent. Thanks very much, guys. Do we have any questions or comments from the floor? I'll go with Max first.
Thank you, Martin and Ian. I think two things which I just sort of say, which I think are really, really positive. So one is to put ourselves on the front foot in considering this. I think that's a really, really good thing. And I think the report is a brilliant sort of mapping of the landscape of all of the things that you might get kind of involved in. You know, I think very little is left out in terms of dividing Frome up and thinking about the various different assets that might be transferred in some way. And I think all of the information about the different types of transfer are also really, really useful and will need to really be considered by the working group. I would, however, make a couple of slightly cautionary comments about, I suppose, the overall tone of the report and what is possible and the context within which all of this happens. So the first thing I'd say is that there's a lot of conversation and a lot of allusion to places like Cornwall and places like Wiltshire and all of that. I think the Somerset picture is very different to those. So those are quite calm and well-resourced transfers and if you look at the Cornwall setup, they had a huge team of people working on this to do all of the work that is necessary. And I suppose what is slightly frightening in the report is the number of due diligence surveys, the number of, it's like almost all of these bullet points are several months' work, which will need to be resourced. And I think rather than there being a calm transfer, and there was something in the report about, any transfer is likely to be cost neutral. I think that's not true. I think you will need to probably take it on at less than is the current value and the current funding for it, because I think the new council will face a very, very significant financial challenge. There's 18 million talked about in the original business case. I strongly suspect it's going to be much, much more than that. And so rather than there being a kind of calm transfer a la Cornwall, a la Wiltshire, I think it might be more like Northamptonshire, where it's like they will throw things at you and say either take them or lose them. And so I think you have to be prepared. We have to be prepared for that scenario, if you like, where either you take the thing on or you lose it. So there's quite a lot around that for me, which I think the working group will need to consider. So I don't have any problems with the report and its recommendations, but I think the job of the working group will be very significant. Second point I'd make, so I'm going to make 3 points. Second point I would make is really about we're majoring on assets, but I actually think traditionally this council has not necessarily owned lots and lots of asset. And I think where this council has been most successful in my memory is some of the community interventions it makes. So actually what I really want to get into is the work around local community networks and how those are going to operate. And I'm very interested if Kate's got anything to say about that, because I think that will actually be the area where we have traditionally been much stronger players as connectors and advocates and champions and all of those sorts of things for some of the people of Frome, whose voices will be lost in this unless we were to kind of really get behind that. So there is definitely something about not service delivery, but actually how you might get involved in activity which negates the need for so much service delivery, which I think has always been our strength and what we're known for, and something we need to build on. So I'd like to see as much focus on that side of things as there is on asset transfer. And the third, my final point I'd like to make, is I do think we really have to think about the amount of work that's involved in some of the recommendations. I think we have to be quite strategic about which ones you can really take on, because to do condition surveys on all of the things that have been talked about is a vast amount of money. Let me tell you that unpicking who owns what at the college site would probably take a small army of lawyers several years. No one really knows who owns the car park, who owns the leisure centre. All of those sorts of things are really difficult to unpick. So let's not underestimate the amount of work which is being recommended and the capacity of the council to be able to take it on. And my final point is that if you took, this is for, sorry, Chair, this is for, if you took on all of those assets, you would be a very, very different organisation to the one that you are now. A very, very different organisation, and you would employ lots more people. The County Council have just spent a long, long time trying to abolish district councils. They're not going to grow another one. Okay, so I think you need to be really I think we need to be really careful about how much of this we really want to take on, how much of this really suits our core purpose, because otherwise I think you can become very overwhelmed with a lot of assets. And the final point is that assets sometimes are liabilities. You know, and so there is a real danger that you'll take a load of stuff on and therefore not be able to do the other stuff that we've always wanted to do. So, great report, but let's be really careful about the next step, because I think that's going to take a lot of thinking about. Thank you for making my 5 points.
Thanks for that, Max. I think Kate is going to cover some of your points in her report in a moment. I've got a list of people who want to ask questions. I'm going to go John, Rich, and then Nick. And then I'll put Mel on the list. So John, take it away.
So for me, it's to echo the first point that Max was making. I think it was easy to remember because it's the first of many. Around the fact, you know, we have a lot of ambition in Frome to take on things, but the costs, when I just saw that due diligence, you know, and there's studies and consultants, and we talk about precept increases in terms of candy bar a week. Well, how many candy bars are we going to spend on consultants to do this transfer? So I think actually there's one of his messages and one of the points, I can't remember which number, was being bold. And sometimes we're going to take a chance and a leap of faith on some assets, perhaps, but not to take on the liabilities. So that's just a general point. And I think we need to keep that down because I don't think our residents want us to spend tons of cash. And my big question around that is, are the costs of these due diligence processes on these assets, will they be shared with county? I mean, or is it all going to fall upon us as a town council?
Let me answer the very last point. I mean, the honest answer is we don't know really. Undoubtedly, the district or the county will have some condition surveys in some form, however old they are, and there'll be massive gaps. So what we need to do when we've decided what things that we want to go for, I think is consider the extent of due diligence we really feel we need to do to be able to do that, but bring in whatever else is already existent in files in Taunton or Shepton. It's a really good point.
Okay, thank you. Rich.
Thank you. Only 2 points, 2 questions. Thanks, Ian Martin, for a really good report. I totally agree. A couple of questions. One is, you know, how effective are these LCNs going to be? Because I think they will only be effective if they can be constructed with parish and other stakeholders' involvement in, but also decision-making ability. So I would urge any future unitary councillors to and parish councillors to kind of work together to make sure that these LCNs really have teeth, but not just teeth for the unitary authority, that some financial decisions can be made as well, because it's going to be crucial to the failure or success of some of our plans. And lastly, I think the next stage for me is I want to see some actual numbers. You know, I want to see, I'm fed up of hearing that car parks don't make money. Well, it doesn't seem that anybody wants to give them up, so they obviously don't lose money, they obviously make something. So I really would like to see some figures, the cost of running the key centre, all that sort of stuff. And I would urge again the new unitary authority and existing authorities to work with us and give us that information freely so that we can make a really good decision based on all of the information and not ifs and might be's and maybes. They could help us a lot to make these decisions. Cheers.
Thank you very much. Nick.
Yeah, John and Max have covered the main point I was going to make about the cost of all this work. But one thing I wanted to ask about is maybe Ian and Martin can help. Hypothecation, is there any chance that we could get an income stream from, for instance, speeding cameras in the town?
Would you like to come back on that? Yeah, I think that the deal is that there are deals to be done, I think, is the point. Our difficulty is we haven't the context that we have to take is the business case. What we haven't actually got are the people who will be making the decisions, who are appointed into the new authority at the moment, which you'd hope would be following the business case. But that the context of that's very important, because the degree of flexibility that you're going to have, and you've got to think, a strategic organisation doesn't necessarily want to get involved with lots of stuff at the detail level, and there's going to be advantages on their part as well in transferring assets. And I think you're an advanced town council. There are many that aren't at the level that you're at. There's talk of capacity building, funding to support you to do this work, because it's not all in your, it's not you grabbing, it is about a better way of running things in the future. So you'd hope there'd be absolute transparency on figures, the numbers, the discussion that takes place, because it's going to be costly for the big organisation to run a number of these things, and they're going to want to offload things as well. So, and you, what we've tried to say is go in, try to get your eyes open to where the pitfalls are and where the issues could be, so you can be an equal partner in that negotiation. So you take on what you want to take on, you don't become the organisation you don't want to be, you do look at your influence roles, and you do look at the alternatives as well, and you do look at the way that you can work through the LCNs. Don't try and take on everything. If I haven't been clear about that, I do think that's a very important point. Don't try and take on everything, because you'll become a very different organisation and a mini district council. What you've got to be very strategic about what you want to take on, but you absolutely want to influence the way things are run, and some things you want to prioritise high in the list to be able to take on. Regarding hypothecation, it happens in respect to things like car parking income. I've seen that. I'm car park speeding and the likes. I don't know. It gets into a tricky ground as well, where you can become quite criticised. You have to bear that in mind by your residents if you're the one that are putting up the parking fine cameras or whatever, and you're the one collecting the income, and you will also be in the firing line for making those decisions. There is an issue that will come that you'll find with some of those tricky areas. Even raising the car park fees is not always the easiest of things for an elected member group to do, but necessary to do. So it's things to be aware about. But there will be deals to be done around the way in which the town centre runs. The reason car park income is as good as it is in Frome, I've to say and said to you, is because you've been so good at managing the town centre and the facilities and the Frome markets and everything else. Without that, they would have taken a nosedive. So I think that's a very important question. If you want to continue running those facilities, those events, you might want to be taking the income from the car park as well. It's a good negotiating point, but at the moment we haven't got the transition team to negotiate around the table with you. So we've tried to prepare you as best we can for those circumstances.
Thank you for that, Martin. We're going to pass over now to the infinite wisdom, Mel Usher. I was doing a segue.
Just 2 points. I'm not as pessimistic as Max, actually, because if you strip out some of the larger buildings like Sports Centre, perhaps the Merlin, a lot of it's about land and it doesn't go anywhere else. So either we get it or we don't get it, if you see what I mean, or we agree to take it on or don't agree to take it on. It's not as if they're going to be able to close all of this stuff. So that's the first point. Second is we may turn out like Chippenham in Wiltshire, because the deals in Wiltshire weren't that smooth, and Chippenham took 10 years to get from beginning to end. But actually what I'd like to suggest is that we go for one deal. We actually say, okay, if we take on the library and if we take on some of the open spaces and some of the other assets, you give us the car parks and the car park income, so that you don't have a whole series of drip feed where you're not quite sure what the end's going to be. So you might end up taking something really expensive at the beginning and something cheap later on. So if we just say it's one deal, this is the deal, this is what we've prepared. If you want an example for the rest of the county, use us. And we can all move forward on that basis. So that would be my suggestion as to how to handle this.
Thank you, Mel. I'm just going to squeeze Andy Palmer in there as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Martin. Appreciate we're talking primarily about devolution of assets this evening. But one thing that occurs to me, particularly with what Mel's just said about one deal Is there any grounds to look at certain service delivery within the devolution of assets as part of a deal? So I'm thinking, for those members of the public that have asked me about, are you going to get planning? Well, we're probably not going to get planning in any way, shape or form, but we might be able to get licensing or sort of low level decisions on things like extensions, et cetera, is that something that you would factor in at the start with a devolution deal, or are we talking that that's something that will come further down the line?
Do you want to answer that one, Ian? Because I think you've been quite close to that.
I think it is something you'd want to consider. As Mel's just said, I think you need to consider it holistically, and if there are services that you might want to take on which would benefit the people of Frome, it is something to think about as a whole piece rather than bits and pieces. I think so. Again, I think it's far from clear. That's a work in progress. I think what services might be transferable at the moment. So, and again, as Martin's already said, we haven't got anyone to. The work is ongoing, I suppose, with the transition team at the moment. So I think actually, Paul might be able to correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think there is already a bit of clarity on planning and licensing, and it's unlikely that those will be transferred over. I think that may have been discussed at one of the previous meetings. But so I think, and that's because they're regulatory functions, and there's some requirement on the new authority to retain them, I believe. But yeah, there are other things you might want to look at. And I know Kate's been working on, obviously, on the pilot, the LCM pilot. So there's some good examples there of things you might to take on as part of that deal. Hopefully that answers the question.
So I think, that's all I have to say. Sorry about that. Unitary Project Group are making it really clear that local community networks will not consider planning or highways issues. The thinking behind that is because if they do, they won't do anything else. I think there's something really interested in exploring with those two statutory functions how to bring them closer to our local community network and having them based in Frome. Because a lot of the time it's not about having the responsibility to make decisions, it's actually having a conversation with the highways engineer that never comes out of County Hall in Taunton. So I think that's one way to go. Andy's wider point about other services, I think we need to just explore what they might be. One of the things, being a bit of a wimp, I think we need to think very carefully about taking on things that would make this council unpopular by sort of imposing things or denying things. The last sort of 5, 6, 7, 8 years, we've been quite good at being on the side of the angels, and I think we need to be really careful about just jumping over to the side of the enforcer, which might make this council unpopular and might detract from other things we might want to do.
Okay, yeah, if I can just add to that, obviously you'll need to consider, as one of Martin's slides, and it was discussed at length, I think, about what kind of organisation you want to be, and so that adds into Paul's point. It's which role do you want to play, or which mix of roles do you want to play? So it's something for that working group to have a really good think about and really consider in depth, I think.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to stop taking questions from the floor now. Rachel, have we got any online?
No, we haven't got any questions online.
No. Okay, well, thank you, Martin and Ian, for that.
Oh, hang on. Lizzie's waving at us.
Oh, sorry, I was waiting for my cue to put my hand up. Thank you. Sorry about that. I have 3 things, which I will try and form into questions. Where Mel is someone who wants to run into the ocean. I'm someone who dips their toe in and goes more slowly. So I was thinking about when you talked, Mel, about the one-time only deal. That felt kind of big and scary. But actually then I thought, well, what if you had a one-time only deal, but with phasing that said, actually, we want all of these things, but we want to take them on in a measured fashion over time, because that then gives Frome Town Council the chance to build its capabilities internally, or the community and community interest companies the chance to build their capabilities to take on be it assets or services. So I think maybe there's a sort of patient jumping into the water, if that's possible. Mixing my metaphors, it's late. John, I think, was the first to mention, and others have mentioned about funding challenges. I wondered if, as part of any deal, we could say to the unitary, okay, then come on, stump up to help us with the inevitable consultancy costs of due diligence and legals and stuff, because you're doing this to us. You know, you kind of took the decision, or government took the decision that this was going to happen. You're asking the people of Frome to pay for a whole bunch of surveyors, cost consultants, lawyers, and so forth. And the people of Frome have got other things that they need to be paying for right now. So come on, Somerset, give us a bit of a hand with this, because you're making this situation. So rather than just us just having to go into our reserves and say, oh, look, here's some money for a lawyer, what can we get? And then the other funding thing is about revenue funding, ongoing revenue funding. We know that there are big pots of capital funding around for all sorts of different things. And capital funding is usually quite accessible, and town council's proven it's very good at getting it from different sources. But my big thing would be, well, how are we going to get the revenue funding to pay for all the other stuff that goes around these big sort of capital assets? And just making sure that that's factored into our thinking, and creative thinking as early as possible. And that's my 3.
Thank you, Lizzie. Right, I guess we're at the proposing stage now. So I have a proposer. Sorry, the question is to adopt. Richard Ackroyd, seconded by John Nelson. All of those.
That's unanimous. Can we say thank you to Martin?
Yeah, thanks again to Martin and Ian. We are going to get an update from Kate now on the Frome Area Local Community Network.
Hello. I'll be brief. Some of you have seen this, and I have got a few slides. Apologies. They're coming. Okay. Damn, I thought I could control my own slides. Right, next slide then, please. So we are working on a pilot LCN. It's one of 3. There is one that has shaped up very differently on the Quantox that has actually, interestingly, been focused around highways. There is one in Castlecarry, Bruton and Wincanton, and they need a catchier name so it's easier to say. And there's us. There's a 4th pilot, but that's focused on asset devolution, and that's in Bridgewater. So essentially 3 pilot LCNs looking at how parishes might come together around a larger town. And so primarily they will hopefully all be focused in that kind of context. So ours, we invited everybody in this area to join us. And actually, we also invited a couple of parishes that are over the Wiltshire border, because there's a flow of residents from Frome out to those parishes, and from those parishes into Frome, and we are using services collectively. So we were given an initial topic of communities and social care, which was enormous, and we vaguely, slightly refined it by working on a topic of children, young people and families. But more importantly, and can I have the next slide, please? We have focused our work on a way of working and building relationships with the parishes. So, and a range of other partners, but in the first instance, parishes. And it's been really important for us to go slow to go fast, to build on the existing relationships, but also to bring them with us on a way of working that is underpinned by our working communities and the principles of participation, engagement, enabling and community development. Can I have the next slide, please? And we've created a methodology which we think can be deployed to any given topic that the LCN might wish to consider. and that's outlined here. That's about groups of residents and councillors, in this instance from all tiers, but as we go forwards, that will be 2 tiers coming together to discuss and better understand topics that are important to them. And that will be informed and overlaid by formal data. And at the moment, the County Council's data team are collating a range of data sets for us, which is a blueprint really for the 20 LCNs that are to come in a year's time, which we should be able to interrogate, and it should allow us to look at the issues for us as a town, but also for the wider area collectively, but then to be able to differentiate between areas into parishes and also between rural issues and town issues. So we're quite hopeful that these data sets will really give us some robust understanding of the topics and issues that we want to look at. But we know it's really important to also consider the qualitative data, the story of the residents in our area, what their real lived experience is, and what that looks like in terms of data, and because that's what brings these things to life. So then the decision amongst the LCN about, you know, what topic next, what do we further explore, what do we deep dive, do we need to, where are we going to head with this, will enable us to then bring working groups together to really consider who the local stakeholders are. They might be strategic leads from the unitary authority, but they're also the organisations, the third sector organisations that are working in this area, the people that are running the schools. For example, when we're talking about children and young people, the voluntary organisations that are delivering a whole host of services are equally as important as those strategic leads. And then to come together and to consider what a local area agreement might look like. What does an action plan look like around any given topic? How is that delivered? How is that presented back to the LCN? How is it agreed? How is it funded? How is it actioned? Because actually what we don't want, the worst case scenario would be that LCNs become a talking space and that we don't have any action. We know that they are going to have budgets, and we know that there will be some decision making made at LCNs, and they are currently being considered as committees of the unitary authority. But can I have the next slide, please, Laura? But we are really clear that what's really important is that we don't lose the opportunity for place-based action, and that we don't, if you like, become a quango of the local authority without having the ability to influence the development of place-based services. So through this pilot, we are looking at a range of things that are important, that have, I guess initially came out of perceived issues from the parishes, so a lack of sport and recreation facilities, rural isolation, a rise in antisocial behaviour, interestingly, a rise in teenagers causing problems in our areas. And we've collated those. We've looked at how we can better understand the data and who we need to bring in to inform our understanding as a group of parishes about what those issues really are and how that translates. And I'm going to talk to you later on this evening a bit briefly about those. So we've moved into that discovery phase, if you like, around the topics, and we recognise that we're all. It's important that we are all stakeholders in this, but in particular, we're bringing parishes around us into a way of working that they're not previously familiar with. So it has been a bit of a slow journey, I guess, in the first instance, but what they're describing now is that they're pleased to be on it and that they can see the benefits, because as we go through, we're developing an action plan, and we have really small, simple actions to quite large actions. What we're also finding is that we're really positively influencing our colleagues in the local authority, and that's both at Mendip and at the County Council, and in due course that will be the unitary, that they are recognising the importance of developing place-based services, that they recognise that, well, it's a bit of a no-brainer. If you put £1 in here, then you can save £15 over there. So it makes sense to them, but it's the conditions are right for that kind of change. And again, although at the moment that's around children and young people services, we are pretty confident that the model will work around other topics and other issues. So it's really important that we build in evaluation, and we're working with the unitary team so that we have some kind of consistent evaluation. But again, we need to do that quite quickly, otherwise we'll lose the opportunity to have that baseline. And we're developing terms of reference, because we know that the unitary team have got their democratic services and various legal teams working on terms of reference, but we want terms of reference that really work for us as well and give us agency at a local level. So we're keen to make sure that our voice is influencing those terms of reference, and they've agreed for us to take a lead in convening a group of interested parties from those 3 pilot areas to come together to develop a terms of reference ourselves, and for then us to work with them to make sure that their terms of reference reflects ours, and vice versa. So I guess that is a real brief whistle-stop tour of where we are. Yeah, and I guess any questions?
One question, right? Oh, one question. One question. So the original idea was, when you say we, who is we? Is we just a bunch of parishes? Because my original understanding of both bids, actually, was that the local community networks were ways of convening all of the statutory agencies around a particular area, including police, including health, including all of those sorts of people. So are they involved, or is this a piece of work the parishes are doing and then feeding it back to the county?
No, so we started with parishes, and we started with parish councils, and as we go through the topics, we now have a schedule of meetings that we're sharing widely with everybody, because it's absolutely critical that all of the other agencies are involved, but not necessarily in every meeting, that they are involved around a topic that's pertinent to them. So for example, we discussed rural isolation at the last meeting. Somebody from who's working in the early help team and education came to talk about a project that has been delivered in West Somerset, but also was able to bring us data about this area, because unbeknownst to most of us, we've been twinned with this project in West Somerset. So they were able to share with us why we had been twinned and bring that to life. Somebody from the chair of the early help board came to talk to us about people's experience. At the next session, the police are coming to talk about crime and social behaviour and vandalism. And they're sending someone from the violence reduction unit as well, and we'll bring statistics and data and information with them. And as we go forward, we're including more and more people that are pertinent and important to the topic. Ultimately, we want it to be for everybody. It's an opportunity for residents, interested parties, and the wider community, as much as all of the organisations, to be involved in.
Just to clarify, they're coming because the data suggests there is an issue that requires their attention. Is that the way you're doing it?
Well, we're still waiting for this data set, this dream data set, to arrive with us. So at the moment, they're coming because we're inviting them. And we're saying, this is the topic, and we'd like you to come. But the strategic leads at the county council have been very proactive in extending those invitations to people and coming to many of the meetings, because they can see where their priorities are. We are looking to potentially address them, with them, for them, in partnership, and so they can see the mileage in coming.
Thanks, Max. Nick?
Thanks very much, Andy. Kate, really interesting. I worked for some years on in another part of the country with local strategic partnerships, which were a disaster because they just became a group of fairly senior people talking about stuff. I think inevitably the focus will become on problem families, problem individuals. I was at Sainsbury's today and an 82-year-old, 83 tomorrow, cashier told me she and her husband had moved to Frome from Bruton and basically built and renovated a beautiful house and lived in it for 30 years. Then a problem family moved in next door, and within 6 months they sold up, moved, husband died with a heart attack. Those kind of stories of the impact of problems will be something I think have a real bearing on the work you're doing, and it's kind of tricky to find a way around that, especially when you've got police coming into you with data soon, because that will become the focus. And I think you said at the start that the initial conversations about antisocial behaviour, youths congregating.
It's really important to us that these are strategic meetings, because we have got the team around the school meetings, we have got the one team meetings. You know, we don't have a statutory responsibility for those, and our partners, colleagues do have. And you know, this, and I think in terms of the way that the unitary and the business unitary team are looking at this, local government reorganisation team are looking at this, is that they very much see these as a strategic development partnership and not a service delivery mechanism. So yes, there'll be a challenge, but hopefully we'll do that. You know, what we hope we'll achieve, and I'll talk to it a bit later, is the development of some really robust coordinated place-based services, which will enable those things to be addressed at a local level. But this is not the forum, the local community network is not the forum where we're going to get into that detail, we hope.
Thanks, Nick. Mel?
In the original report on LCN, there was quite a lot of emphasis on having a senior member of staff who would be based in that LCN and some admin support, because there's always going to be the need to kind of keep it moving, agendas, chasing people. Has any discussions taken place about whether that will occur or not?
Yeah, there are. So the unitary team are looking at how LCNs, there'll be 20 LCNs across the county, and how they will be supported and staffed. They're looking at having a senior member of the unitary team support each LCN, and they're also looking at how administration can be done. What we're quite keen to do through our pilot is to make sure that we don't lose our local independence in that process, and so how we can positively influence that business case, if you like, and the way that they have sort of developed and formed that rationale, so that we can have a local independence is quite important to us. So we're talking to them now about how that might happen. At the moment, there's been no funding come through, so this is something that we have taken on. It's supporting our work and it's enabling us to grow things. But there is also some funding becoming available right about now, which we hope will come through, which we know will come through to those pilot LCNs, and they'll be in two different kind of pots. So that's an opportunity for us to just play with some of that local leadership and ownership as well.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Can I just add that I would really welcome further conversations with anybody that's interested, and that we sort of developing that engagement at this level is really important, because this is an opportunity for us to really positively influence the development of LCNs, and we have a really good place at the table right now to be able to do that, and so let's make the most of it.
Thank you. Scott, yeah, jump in.
Just to jump in there. I just was wondering, because obviously it's important with the data that we talk about the human element and the stories behind it, because you always need that human element. With the data set, do we know where that's come from? Do we know about the fidelity of that? You know, what proportion of people from the LCN have formed that data? Because the last thing we want to do is build something on data that we can't be 100% sure of.
Yeah, so I'll talk a bit more later about some of the issues because they chime with some of the work that we're doing already in our communities team. But the data set that the county council are pulling together is really robust data. So it's got census data, albeit 10 years out of date. We're waiting for last year's census data to come online, but that won't be for another 18 months probably. It's got data around deprivation indices, but they have, within the county council, they have lots of health data, lots of education data, lots of social care data that they haven't previously necessarily pulled together into one data set. So I like data, so I'm quite excited about it. Our challenge will be to make sure that we balance that with really good qualitative data. And that's the story and that's the work that we need to do with our neighbouring parishes to enable us to really gather that. And actually, just to add that in the report that you've had, we have, on the basis of the county council agreeing to fund out of the early help service and public health, a part-time post in the Frome area to gather data around the services and the opportunities that particularly are in the parishes. We've started to do that ourselves. We have got an opportunity to support the parishes to look at how to gather qualitative data in a way that will give us that robust data set. So there's a long answer to your question, but in essence, yes.
Cool, thank you very much. We're going to head on to agenda item 4 now, which is to, where are we? Whether to acquire the leasehold on the Loop-de-Loop building and the Cattle Market car park, and that is with Peter Wilhouse.
Good evening, everyone. And I've been asked to briefly introduce this one because Nikki Brain is unfortunately unable to be with us this evening. Hopefully, most of you will be aware of the Loop-de-Loop, a small building just off the Cattle Market car park. For many years, it's provided a home for the community fridge and the larder. The community fridge is a really important part of community life now. It's saving 30 tonnes of food waste a year on average, and is relied on by quite a number of people in vulnerable circumstances in the community. But it's also provided a home for a number of other community uses. The building remains in the ownership of Mendip District Council, but for a number of years was actually leased to a group of volunteers. The lease lapsed in 2018, and we're now being asked to take on a lease of that particular building. In many ways, I mean, some of the issues that we were discussing earlier come up in the case of the Loop-de-Loop. The lease that was operating before covered the front part of the building where many of these community uses have been going on, but we understand from Mendip District Council that they're prepared to lease the rear portion to us as well. And we're currently doing some due diligence, that was mentioned earlier. We're doing some due diligence, albeit at a relatively low cost, to understand what liabilities there may be in terms of taking it on. And naturally, our advice would be that we don't sign anything until that due diligence is completed. But nonetheless, I think the conclusion is that there is something useful for us to do in terms of taking this lease on. And so the proposal is to take on a 5-year lease on a peppercorn rent and take responsibility for the ongoing maintenance. You may actually ask, how is this maintenance going to be paid for? Usefully, recently there was some crowdfunding activity to replace the doors on the community fridge and larder, which were damaged by vandalism. Thankfully, that crowdfunding activity raised more funds than were needed for that particular repair, which we're currently holding. And so that can be deployed to enable that maintenance work to proceed, and we've estimated the cost of that to be in the region of £800. So that is affordable. So there you have it, really. And the recommendation, I think, will be up on the screen in a few moments. Just a reminder of that. And over to councillors for any questions.
Thanks very much, Peter. We're going to go with Mark and then Sarah.
Thank you, Peter. Two questions. I promise there are two questions. Take them separately, please. The first one is, in view of what we've just been talking about, long conversation about the evolution of assets, why aren't we asking for the freehold? Why don't we just take the freehold on rather than take a 5-year lease?
I think our understanding is at the moment that that isn't available, but Paul probably will confirm that.
Yeah, the common response from the asset managers at Mendip at the moment is not to transfer the freehold on anything. We've come across this on the more recent open spaces we've taken on. Fingers crossed, become a unitary council, then freehold may be more forthcoming.
It just seems that it would be a good opportunity to take on the freehold now, because our lease will transfer to unitary, and then we may have to spend more money on fees to renegotiate our lease with the unitary that we already hold with Mendip. So if we could take on the freehold now and cut that out, it would be seamless, in my opinion. If we could argue for that, that would be sensible.
We've argued for that, and the same argument on all the open spaces we've asked for. Why not just pass it now and you don't have to transfer it?
This is a liability for them, yeah.
Yeah, they're all liabilities, aren't they? But they're not shifting on that.
I
We have asked, and our preference is always to acquire freehold.
Thank you. The second question is, appreciate the fridge, coat rack, etc. We have to support that. On the end, we have Lungi Baba and JJ. Do they pay any rent? Is there any facility they pay? Because they are, and although we support them, they're great people on helping us out in the middle of the town there, it's still a business. Do they pay anything towards the upkeep of their building?
I don't think there is any rent passing at the moment, actually. And there may well be some restrictions in the context of the lease in terms of a formal subletting. It's a fair point that you raise, but I don't think it's happened to date. I mean, clearly that's something that can be reviewed in the future.
Thank you, Mark. Sarah.
This is a really, well, it is kind of a question. It's, in recent discussions with the market traders, the subject of rats has been quite significant, and they are known to be underneath that particular building and at the back. And according to the Saturday and Wednesday market manager, it's quite a significant problem, and the concern at the moment is that they're going to eat through the ground up and the electrics powering the units as well. So in terms of an ongoing maintenance cost, that may be something quite significant. I know that Nick here has spoken to the local ferret association, seriously, to see if there's anything we could do. Apparently rats really hate ferrets, but they won't give us a ferret. So, and it was just...
My rats, so backed off.
Ferret's gone. So yeah, it's something that might need to be acknowledged.
It's an issue that the structural engineer that's looking at the rear portion of the building is aware of, and they'll report back to us on how serious they think the problem is and what we might need to do to deal with it. So we're awaiting that.
Thanks very much. We're going to go to Scott.
Yeah, just two questions for me. The first one is, obviously the lease lapsed in 2018, so 4 years ago. What happens if we just don't take it on? If we just say, actually, we're all right, we'll wait until you're ready to pass it over? That was my first question.
I came here tonight and I vowed I wouldn't say anything. I sent to Max. Actually, there's got to be a time when you say, hang on, we're not doing this any longer in terms of silly leases. I agree with Mark. We'll have to pay twice. I wonder whether there's a point where we say, no, we're not going to do it. There's been no lease for the last 4 years. go away. Yeah. We'll take the freehold off you. Now, this might not be the example, and there may be others coming up, but they'll keep on drifting like this until such time as we say we ain't going to do it. So I know you've tried. I know you've tried, but there may be a point where you just say, "Well, okay, come back in a year's time."
I think it's fair to say that we've been encouraged to take this on by the various community organisations who are involved in running the services. They, I don't think, would be prepared to take on the lease themselves. So somebody, I guess, needs to do so. In order that these activities can continue. And I think we took the view it was a reasonable step for us to take in order to keep things going, for us to take on the lease. It's also a short step towards ownership in the future. But at the end of the day, I think you've got to make your own judgment as to whether you feel it's a priority for us to take on.
Yeah, and I think if it was a case that the Loop to Loop cafe area there and the community fridge were at risk, then obviously we wouldn't want to lose those. But I think that's my question. Is there a risk if we don't take those on? I mean, or are Mendip going to be the council that turns around and says you can't have a community fridge there anymore? If no one comes forward to take the lease, does it just mean Mendip has to deal with it themselves?
I really like these kinds of discussions. I think we should be challenging Mendip more on this. This is the current leaseholder is not able to deal with, or the previous leaseholder is not able to deal with it anymore. And I think one of the reasons we're proposing to take this on now is to ensure that in addition to dealing with the rats, we can keep the community fridge going, because I think it's Adventure that run it but aren't able to take on the lease, or aren't willing to take on the lease. I wouldn't be surprised if Mendip turn around and say, no, we're not maintaining it, because they haven't done it, and then everything falls into disabeyance, and I think the fridge and the larder would be at risk as a result. However, I completely agree with your point generally, but the day-to-day reality of dealing with another council on this has meant that we've really struggled to make any headway, and we think actually doing something actively now to enable the fridge and the larder to continue is where we're suggesting we go. If we didn't, then one action Mendip may take, and they're not averse to doing this kind of thing, is just closing it down and not maintaining it. And I think that would be a poor result for the community.
The second question I had was the mention of the opposite side of the building, and that might be on the table as well. Do we have any sort of vague ideas or suggestions of what we might use it for?
Part of that rear area is actually used to support some of the market activities that go on. I think over time, there's an opportunity for us to look at that more closely. But for the moment, it seems a useful thing for us to do, to take on the rest of it, subject to due diligence that is done. I mean, if we feel that it's too big a liability for us to take on that part of the building, then we will say so, and the lease will continue to be for the front portion of the building only. So that's something for us to look at in a bit more detail when we get the report back from the structural engineer.
Sorry. Oh, Lizzie's got her hand up.
Okay, Lizzie, I'll put you on.
Hello again. It was going to be 2, and now I've got 3. It's you guys. One was the back of the building question, because in the report it just says it's at the front of the building, but you've now said it's both sides that we're looking at the lease. So I just wanted to double check that it is both sides.
Yeah, it's both sides, but really it's subject to that report and what comes back in terms of the liabilities. If we feel that those liabilities are too great, then our advice would be that when it comes to signing the lease, that we take on the front portion only.
Okay. Sorry, I'm confused by the agenda, the paper that came out, because the lease would be for 5 years, covers the front units of the building with MDC retaining responsibility for the back room. So that's changed.
The reality is that since the paper was printed,
Yeah, fine.
this new opportunity has emerged. So
No, that's cool. I just wanted to clarify why it was that something had changed. I hadn't just misread something.
Okay.
My second thing is about then whether, because we know that there's vandalism, I think there might have been more vandalism, and another broken door. Obviously, these have either replacement costs or insurance implications. And then if we take on the back of the building, which has an electricity supply, does that have additional insurance implications? And I think probably, like you said, your due diligence report will look at all of those aspects. So I'll not turn that into a question. And then third thing on the lease, is there some way to get, I need my property people in the room, a lease with a break clause, or a lease which says our intention is to look at this and to do some of the groundwork now that would enable that transfer to happen later, rather than committing us to a 5-year lease where we're sitting and then missing an opportunity to take it on when we go unitary.
I think, Lizzie, it's a 5-year lease at a peppercorn rent. Our objective is just to get the fridge going.
Just get it,
make it still there, and there are break clauses in it that we can both walk away from it. I think it's so relatively so cheap that I think it's just something we just need to do.
Cool. I agree wholeheartedly with the principle, and I love the fridge and the larder, and Lundy Papa. So, yay.
Thanks, Lizzie. I'm going to do 2 more, and then I'm going to go to a vote, and we're going to have a break. So I'm going to go with Rich and then John.
Well, it's my turn. Yeah, I agree. I think we should take it on. But I mean, we're already spending a fair bit of money of Ranger's time. Last couple of times I've been down, Ranger Dave's been there fixing up the door and so on. So we are kind of already spending some money on it, I guess. But my question is there an option for a 2-year lease or a 1-year lease? That way, the lease comes up for renewal when the new unitary is in place and the next council is in place. You've got a 5-year lease, it will be the end of the new council, there'll be elections again, it'll get lost in the mists of time, possibly. I just wonder if a shorter lease might be more practical if we want to possibly buy it later.
We can have that conversation with Bendit. I'm loath to rock the boat, I just want to do it, but we can do.
Okay, John.
Well, I really like the suggestion of Richard just there. I mean, my inclination is to listening to what people are saying is actually, do we want to just have dribs and drabs, little bits like this coming at us? Or should we take a position on this, say we'd like the freehold, actually? That's what we really want. We're already maintaining it anyway. Or just leave it as it is, because even without it as it is, I think it's unlikely anyone is going to close the fridge, especially since we're maintaining it anyway already. But the compromise would be the 1-year lease option that Richard proposed, which I think is very sensible because it does mean it's released when the time comes for us to take on assets, because they've made it clear assets won't transfer or freeholds won't transfer until it's all with unitary anyway, I think, because they've been told they can't.
So what we'll do, we'll talk to Mendip about the possibility of having a lease to the end of Mendip District Council on the 31st of March next year. Okay.
All right. Okay, so I need a proposer for this. Sarah, seconded by Nick Dove.
Sorry.
I did
complimentary. Yeah.
I'll allow.
I get told I don't speak enough at these meetings. I didn't realise until Peter just said about the rear of the unit. and you say that houses equipment used by the market, which is a Mendip market for which they get revenue. So we're being asked to take on a building for our purposes, which we fully support, but we're also carrying the building to support Mendip's activities there as well. So they're winning both ways. They're getting free housing for their equipment, which we're paying for. It used to be that we used to get Mendip district councillors coming to this meeting. I don't know if they're any watching online. I would have thought that the reputational damage of Mendip allowing a building to fall in disrepair, which houses community assets that we've got, would be enough of an impetus for them to be a bit more lenient with us on this. And having a yearly lease, which presumably we have to pay a lawyer to renew every year. I mean, we're talking about £800 to restore the place. I don't know what the ongoing legal fees would be every year. And then when we finally have to renegotiate the thing with Somerset, hopefully to get the freehold. I mean, I don't know, I'm going around in circles here, but I think they should just give us the freehold and we'll very, very generously allow them to keep their stuff on our premises.
We can demand the freehold. We've tried it and they won't give it to us. The reputational risk on Mendip is irrelevant to them. And on the plus side of the financial side, we do get free electricity for the fridge and bungee bargee and all the rest. So they don't charge that side of the building electricity. So there's some comeback on financials there. I just thought it was quite a good idea. We look after the fridge. I mean, frankly, why is it so difficult? Sorry.
No, vote for it. I think it's a great idea.
Proposer, Sarah, seconded by Nick Dove, voted by ...
That's unanimous.
Excellent. All right.
Yeah, we'll ask. Absolutely. Yeah. There's an action to ask. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, well done, guys. We've done really well so far. We're going to have a 5-minute break. Or do you want 10? What do you want, 5 or 10? 5. 5-minute break.
That's not the bloody principle. It is the principle.
But the principle is that they're being sods, aren't they? And
They're being what?
Well, they're being sods. They're being disruptive.
They are, and we need to challenge them.
Nice to see you, Jill. Take care. Bye, darling. Yeah, sure. Can you hear your tables calling, ladies and gentlemen? Come back to your tables. Thank you very much.
Oh, God. Is it me? Yeah.
Huh? No, it's not right.
I start? Okay, I'm going to start because I'm sure we all want to go home. At some point, I'm going to be as quick as I can, but I've got some photos to show you. So this is an update about our community development work, what we're going to be doing in the next 6 to 9 months, and why we're going to be doing it. So hopefully this brings some of the LCN discussion to life a little bit. So I'm going to start with our children and young people's work. We currently work in a system that is a statutory approach to delivering services, and we are watching children, young people and their families actually aspiring to get to the top of this triangle where they can get the most significant services. The CAMS teams are there, they're not necessarily aspiring to social care, or the police, but nevertheless, that journey, if you like, of young people is almost an inevitable journey, and in reality, this triangle is not replicating where services are or how they currently look. It really should be turned on its head. So the bit at the bottom, the out-of-school universal provision, is very limited. Schools and their capacity is increasingly limited, but the demand is getting higher and higher. Thresholds are getting higher and higher, and those services can't cope. So really informed by the work that we've been doing in the last couple of years and the work that we did, particularly with the Stronger Somerset bid for the unitary authority, we've looked at a model and developed a model, a way of working, if you like, that was more of a life world approach. It's person-centred. It's very much based on my onion that you've all seen many times over the years, but this is a far superior iteration of the onion. So it's person-centred, it's got the individual in the middle, it recognises the role of the community. You can't see the differentiation in colours particularly on this slide, but there is one. The role of community and neighbourhoods in supporting individuals and families. It recognises schools, nurseries, those are the universal provisions, the local activities, what we would name the third sector, and then moves through to the kind of crispy layer of the onion on the outside, which is the hard-pressed statutory services, the crisis services, that we really want to avoid people reaching. So we need to support them at a local level. So the work that we've developed around children and young people is very much based on, very much based on the work that we've been doing at a street level and the community development work that we have built over the last 4 years. That has grown and gone from strength to strength, and in no small part really is down to Hannah Stopford and the work that she's done over the last couple of years. We now have 98 street level networks, and Hannah has supported them coming together in the neighbourhood network. Now, coronavirus has also helped, and people have really recognised the importance of making those connections, and we have a wealth of stories about how significant those street networks have been over the last couple of years and continue to be in supporting people at a local level. People are helping each other and helping themselves in ways that they hadn't done previously. And there are lots of examples and lots of stories we will be able to share with you, but tonight isn't the time because we're quite late now. So by enabling street parties, by supporting streets to think about how they come together, we have really increased the networks, the practical and the physical support that people are able to give each other. We've recognised the assets that we have in our communities. They're fixed assets, and a lot of parks and open spaces are really important places for bringing people together. But they're also the people-based assets, the skills that we have in our communities, and that should never be underestimated in looking at how we develop services at a local level. So, as we've been working through the LCN and further exploring some of the issues that we know from practitioners and experienced strategic leads in this area, we have really identified a series of things that are happening for young people in this area. They are missing education for a number of reasons, be that the travelling time, the appropriateness of transport to education that doesn't currently exist within Frome. They are cold and hungry. There is an increase in loneliness and isolation, and that's something we've talked about a lot as a council over the last few years, but particularly pertaining to older people. And we've really underestimated how significant an impact that is in children and young people and in families. And COVID has really exposed that. We've seen children and young people coming back into education settings having experienced significant domestic abuse and neglect. And we anticipate, and schools are anticipating, that that is going to increase with the pressures for the coming year in families, and in families that have never been on the radar of anybody ever in the past. So we're talking about new demographics of families experiencing difficulty and the impact of trauma and how that is presenting in our schools, and as we go further forward, that will present in a range of services and really have a significant impact on how our communities operate. So, working with our partners at all levels of local government, and particularly locally, we are starting to consider how we address those things. Sorry, you can't really see this on the screen. So maybe we'll share these later. So, it's really important that we consider how children and young people are going to be warm and fed going forward. How can they access appropriate education? Is that through transport choices that will give them independence and enable them to be resilient? What does a lack of aspiration and activity lead to? Well, we hope that we can counteract that so that they have improved well-being and outcomes for their future. It's multifaceted, and you can't kind of connect one to another. They really impact on a number of these things, and ultimately there's a lot of work for us to do. But we think that can happen at a local level as much as it can happen at a much higher strategic level. And what we're seeing with the community network is that a whole range of opportunities, if you like, are there for us to pick up, to support and to deliver. And that those actions don't necessarily require significant funding, and they don't necessarily require significant strategic buy-in, support or delivery. So I'll just give you a really brief example. Some of the parishes have been talking about how young people in their parishes don't have access to public transport because there simply aren't buses at the right times of day for them to participate in the clubs and some of the activities that might be available to them otherwise. And they haven't necessarily got engaged parents that are prepared to drive them from A to B on a regular basis. So the parishes are looking at how they might support the development of an inter-parish football league or cricket league that will enable children and young people not only to play on the recreational fields that they have in their parishes and that aren't currently being used, but also to travel between parishes and play games against other young people. They're looking at that as an opportunity to connect the parishes with each other, to connect families with each other and grown-ups, but also for young people to be able to be connected, reducing isolation, providing positive activity, reducing inactivity, and bringing people together in spite of the fact that there is limited transport choices. So it's a really simple action that the parishes are able to do through a willingness. But we're also working on some much bigger, more strategic aspirational projects. So we're looking at mapping a wider geographical area, identifying gaps, we have a focus on universal services. You know, that's the bit that we do really well in this area, and we are able to support and deliver, and the importance of children and young people having more than a single point of entry. At the moment, that's in schools, and schools are expected to pick up almost everything until things reach crisis points and families, children, young people get tipped into those other levels of statutory service. But there's a lot that we can do with our partners, and as you know, we have a really vibrant third sector and voluntary sector in this area, so we can work with them to strategically, in a coordinated way, fill the gaps. But the County Council also have a series of projects which they are keen to work with us on. So one of those is the H2HY. It's a help to help yourself initiative. And that is about connecting people digitally with information and resources to enable signposting, but it's much wider for them. It's about making sure that all of they have been through a discovery phase, and we've been sort of a significant partner in that. So they've reached the point where they've said, okay, well, look, rather than us create another database and another website, and those of you who've been around for a while will have seen various iterations of the County Council's website come through and not really be of enormous benefit to us. They're saying we need to be smarter about this. We need to look at how we can link all of our various mechanisms and websites to each other, and what can we provide that underpins it. And so we are hopeful that it will move towards using a common language that's being trialled across the country now, so that the databases can link with each other and they can be pushed, and the data can be pushed and pulled from various websites. And ultimately, that gives much better flow of information to our local residents. The early help team have invited us to go and talk about the Frome project. I'm not entirely sure what the Frome project is yet, but I'm going to talk to them about the Frome project. And really what they're saying is, look, you know, your way of working and shoring up those services at a community neighbourhood level, we're recognising as pivotal to the way that early help might be delivered in the future. Family hubs, there's been government funding. You've heard me talk about the fact that Sure Start Mark 2.3.4, whatever, will be around the corner, and sure enough it is. And the family hubs is the funding that the government has announced to do that. The County Council have put in a bid, and we are hopeful that Frome will be a pilot area for that bid. That may be a physical base, but may not be. It will certainly be about coordinating services and increasing access to services that families don't currently have. And we're also talking to colleagues in education and the inclusion team to look at what their objectives are and how a more coordinated strategic approach in the Frome area might support them deliver their objectives. And all the way through this, we're recognising the role of the third sector. So the first sector being businesses, private sector, the second sector being statutory services, and the third sector being everywhere else. As a parish council, we sit somewhere between the second and third sectors. We've developed a play strategy for Frome, and that's about play for adults as much as it is for children. And as you know, we're doing a series of work around that so that that comes to life. We're looking to businesses as much as we're looking to use the play strategy to inform our development in our parks and open spaces, particularly with regard to equality and inclusion. As I say, it's about intergenerational and creating those opportunities, and we hope that it will inform and enhance the universal provision that I've been talking about, with free at the point of access out of school opportunities for children, young people and families. Hannah's done a sterling job of encouraging the county council and the district council to change the way that they operate their street closure processes, which means that we have piloted closing streets for playing out in Frome, and the county council have adopted a really simple, straightforward process to enable streets to do that and communities to do that on a monthly basis. And the district council have made it easier for streets to close for street parties. It'll be great when all those teams are under one roof and we can negotiate these things with one set of people. But it's really important for us because not only does that mean that people are able to participate in intergenerational activity with each other, but they're also able to address really significant issues for them that cross-pollinate with all of the other areas of our work programme. So really we're looking at community development. You know, this is about as much as about reducing car use on roads and people being able to reimagine the spaces that they live in, as it is about enabling a space for kids to play out and adults to meet each other. And then we've got Find, which at the moment is a digital database you all know about, but it needs to be so much more. It's great having somewhere that people can search things and find out about what's on in their area. They can signpost, they can support each other to help themselves. But it really now needs to move to the next step, and if you like, this is the Frome project that our colleagues in the County Council are quite interested in, because we're saying we need more than signposting. We need to train the community so that they can help each other, but we also need to provide a telephone service, a face-to-face service, a one-to-one enabling service, so that people get help at the stage at which they need help and before they are moving into a crisis situation. So this is just an example of really some of the work that's come out the street networks, and I can't remember what they're called, it's escaped me. I'll come back to it. There's a group of residents across the town now that are looking at how to support the ecology in their neighbourhoods, and so the Wild Bunch, of course, and so they have been building bird boxes and spreading the word through the street networks, really, and providing just inspiration for small things that we can do in our streets that will have much more significant impact. There are streets talking about how they can come together and consider having a charging point in their street. That will reduce the number of cars in the street, the expectation of parking spaces that we hear so much about, and hopefully lead to a positive step towards our zero carbon ambitions. And I guess finally, just to say that when we started this journey, you know, we were looking at street parties as maybe being a nice to do. And actually, I think we're at the point now where we're realising that street parties are really fundamental in bringing people together in order that they can tackle much bigger things collectively, and ultimately in shaping place-based services for the future that mean that we have resilient, strong communities that are able to look after themselves and each other. I'm guessing there's not many questions because of the time. And I wasn't as quick as I hoped, sorry.
Thanks for that, Kate. And I think I speak for everyone when I say thank you for all the work you do. Amazing stuff. What are we on now? Rachel. 6, a verbal update on the outcome of the town's vote on the event to celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Is it Platinum? Platinum Jubilee. Rachel.
Platinum Jubilee, yes. So Platinum Jubilee is on the 2nd of June this year. we put together last year a working party, which was the Lions and the Inner Wheel and all of the Rotaries. Says it is. Is it not working?
Lizzie, could you hear Rachel then?
Rachel, you're quite quiet.
Yeah, hang on. I'll swap out. I'll swap out.
It's this that was working then.
Hang on a minute. You want me to try this one again? Okay. Oh, I can hear myself then. Is that all right? All right on the screen? Lovely.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, a working party with members of the Rotary, the Inner Wheel, Mark and Anita, and the Lions. But there was no real consensus, so therefore we came to a bit of an impasse. It was agreed that it was really important to celebrate the Jubilee, and so in time and fashion we decided to put the question out to Frome residents using the People's Budget as a mechanism. So £15,000 was set aside as part of the town vote, with the commitment for the decision to rest with that vote. So broadly speaking, January, we canvassed both for ideas and for people to be part of a panel. So the working group was remaining the working group, but we're hoping to add members of the public to that group to make a broader panel. And that was what we were looking for in January. And then in February, we had the panel where the projects were scrutinised. We ended up with 17 projects that we were looking at, so they fitted the criteria. So some projects didn't really fit the criteria, and so they had to come off the thing. The criteria were doability, whether the project could be delivered within the budget, within the time frame, and were in the gift of Frome Town Council. Equitability, how fair the project was in terms of access combined with the greatest benefit to all. And finally, how well a project fitted the brief. Basically, it needed to celebrate the Queen's Jubilee. So some projects didn't go through. The land wasn't ours to improve, or in some cases, the budget wasn't going to be enough. So projects which seemed really, really worthy, Stonebridge Park, a sculpture along the loop-de-loop wall, or the Riverbank project, were discounted because all of that land belonged to Mendip, and it would be nigh impossible to negotiate that within time to celebrate the Queen's Jubilee. The Frome Missing Links project, it was agreed it would make a really worthy Jubilee project, but actually it wouldn't be able to be finished in time or for the budget. So that had to come off. A few other projects, such as the Swift project, it was felt would happen anyway, we're hoping, within the neighbourhood networks. So so that came off. And parties were, of course, mentioned a lot of times within that, street parties were mentioned a lot of times within that conversation. But, of course, we're already doing a lot of work to support street parties, and we'll continue to do that alongside, including those for the Jubilee. So in the end, we had a vote that left us with 3 projects. Large family picnic to entertain everyone, bring everyone together and celebrate. A Jubilee beacon to help light up the UK, to celebrate and commemorate special occasions with a specially commissioned beacon, and the Jubilee Blossom Circle centrepiece in the old show field. So I can reveal we had 873 voters, and the winner was the Jubilee Blossom Circle centrepiece in the show field with 379 votes. So I think everybody is quite happy with that. I hope you're all quite happy with that. As a result, so we're just moving the project forward as quickly as we can now to ensure that any stonemasonry is going to hit the target.
Just a shockingly low number of people, given that the other 29,300 people in Frome are doubtless going to complain in some way.
Yeah, Well, I wouldn't say that a lot of people are complaining either. We certainly did have dissenters on Facebook as ever. But all of that was once the vote was being voted. They did have that opportunity to really air that when the ideas were being brought forward and chose not to voice that then. And also I think there's quite a lot of people who feel probably that it's not something that's really speaking to them.
No, I mean, it's not criticism at all, it just reflects my
Yeah.
thing about consultations generally. Really.
Yeah.
And also,
Yeah.
there wasn't a water slide down Bar Street
Yeah.
for them to vote against.
Well, we did, there were things that we expected might be a bit more contentious, but, either way. Anyway, we are now working with stonemasons and the local quarries to try and get the best solution to bring something marvellous together in the show field that will be accessible. And so we are currently at the stage of, making a workable budget to fit that project into. I don't know if either Anita or Mark have anything else to add, because they've obviously been in this working party.
Sort of
Microphone, Anita.
Sorry. I'm assuming there would be some sort of gathering of people on the day to mark the stone in some way as well. And of course, we've got the piper as part of the day as well. So, yes.
Yes, I mean, that's where we're sort of working backwards from the budget now, so we need to get the stone.
But nothing else to add. That's fine. Thanks.
Mark, you look like you want to add something.
Not really. I just thank Rachel for the help on that. We were cognizant of the fact that not many people voted, but then that's been the history of participatory budgeting in the town since it started, as far as in fact, we seem to have more for this than many others. And there are also the great unheard in Frome who will want to do something and will be organising street parties in their own street, and we're not spending on something. I know it sounds frivolous in the big scheme of world events at the moment, but by June we'll need something a little bit frivolous, and it will be a lasting place that people can go and see, and we'll have a lovely tree, and people can go and sit, and it'll be there. So that'll be great, I hope.
Yeah, and I can just report that the royal oak has been planted in the middle in readiness already, so that's a very nice thing.
Good stuff. Thank you very much. We're going to head to item agenda 7 now, which is the readoption of some chapters in the FTC Constitution. This is the last agenda, and it's with Sarah.
Yes, the paper's been distributed. It's about information, publication, GDPR, and there's minor amendments which have been published. Any questions?
We need a proposer.
Oh, I'm sport for choice. I'll have Ali Barkley on proposing, Andy Palmer seconding, and all those in favour.
Ali and Andy. So now you just got to say that. Yeah.
So we do, actually no, we have an agenda item 8. Sorry, guys, but I'm going to propose that this is done in a confidential session, as it has some delicate financial information. So if I can get a seconder for that, Rich, thank you, and everyone in favour of that. Lovely jubbly, thank you.
So we're really sorry, but the two members or the two members of the public here.
Andy, Anne's got her hand up, I think. Anne's got her hand up.
And Anne's got a hand up.
I know.